Good morning, afternoon, and evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Zachary Nolan. I am joined by my co-host Jake from Peg City Hockey and
Hello.
Coach Ryan D from Hot Garbage Sports.
What's going
Uh,
on today, Zach?
eh, eh. Well, so a couple things have happened. I don't know if we all know this, but a couple things have happened since the last time we posted one of these.
Yes,
Um,
indeed.
You're
in, in,
right. You're right. I really thank you for saying it. I am fully vaccinated. I
Ah, there we
appreciate
go.
the.
Honestly, I
I
was
think that
just trying
means
to weigh
all
you
of
in
us
there.
here are, so that is great.
Yeah, we all have the stickers to prove it.
There we go.
Yeah, and also we missed 3 games from the last year now. And oh boy,
Wow, what a
did
3
we
game
and the
span.
Jets miss 3 games? So honestly, guys, because statistically speaking, most of you are Jets fans, but if you're not, all of us have done videos on what went wrong in those games, going from just disappointment to anger/grief to just, aw shucks, I'm happy I got this far, but this still sucks. So definitely go check those out. But now we kind of move on from that. Where do we go from here? Because this is the fourth time the Jets have made the playoffs in 4 straight seasons, and this is now the third time that they have failed to reach the expectation that was put upon them in the 2017-18 season of making the third round. So, Coach, do you want to start it off?
Well, I'm going to start off a little bit more on the boring one. So now that I've had some time to digest, think about, and lament about it, I'll first start off with what I think should happen as opposed to what I think will happen. And what I think should happen is the Jets will likely stand pat. They won't make any massive offseason or in-season changes. I think this is the team we're likely go into the season with next year. If you think about the free agents plus the Seattle Kraken draft eating up a ton of them, I don't see a ton of opportunities for the Jets to make moves, only really protect their roster. They're going to have to worry about losing a goaltender in the Kraken draft because you got Berdine, you got Comrie and Bressois that they may go ahead and pick for goalie 2, goalie 3. You may end up losing DeMello because I think at this point Stanley's going to get protected, or you're going to lose Appleton and re-sign Kopp. So I think they're going to have their hands full with that. I don't know. Chevy's notorious for not doing a ton of things. And I honestly think now, after thinking about it, the Jets have quite the good team right now. I don't know what improvements they're going to be able to make in the offseason in order to bolster it from where they are today. There's a 3-year window with Hellebuck and with Scheifele before their contracts run out. So
Mm-hmm.
based on all that, cooler heads have prevailed at this time, and I think we're going to be in a loop very similar to what the San Jose Sharks were in, where we have a good team, and we are just going to have to hope it ends up gelling with a few smaller pieces that come in. And I think we're going to have to look internally to people like Perfetti, Vesalainen, and start getting out and getting away from those guys like Thompson and Lewis. Not that I don't like Thompson and Lewis. I know Jake's going to be fired up about it, so I just want to get my piece in before he goes. But I think when you look at the playoffs right now, you notice that the successful teams are rolling 4 lines equally. Montreal did it, the Islanders did it, Tampa Bay is doing it, and now most recently Vegas. If Winnipeg wants to roll 4 lines equally, they're going to have to get guys like Gustafsson, Vesalainen, and Perfetti in there so they can go ahead and roll 4 equal lines. So hopefully they look internally for that. Then you've got guys like Sandberg and Chisholm looking to come up and crack the roster. Yep. And I think your top 4 for defense are set with Hanola, Stanley, Pionk, and Morrissey. And I know to the chagrin of Jake that doesn't include DeMello, but I think DeMello's probably going to be the one taken in the draft. Jake?
Honestly,
Rebuttal.
Ryan, there, I gotta say, I agree with a lot of that, and where you're gonna be seeing my angle is actually probably one that might surprise you, but also might not. I agree with you that I think that this Jets team is what we're gonna be rolling with future. Even though right now, and I can talk about how you might want to trade Kyle Connor, Blake Wheeler, all the complaints I have, a lot of that is just situational right now. When you look at that series, when I look at the Jets team, and like you said, Ryan, their identity, what they've consistently done in the past with Cheveldayoff standing pat, I think this team doesn't make a lot of big changes. That being said, I don't think this team is going to be like the San Jose Sharks because I actually think for some reason there's this gut feeling I have within the fan base, the organization, and just how the media has handled everything since that Scheifele hit and post-elimination in that sweep. I think Paul Maurice and the coaching staff is canned this summer. I think next year, Ryan, you are correct. We're going to see a lot of youth being put into that lineup, and I think the Jets are going to rely on what they have in the system in Perfetti, Heinola, and even Burden to an extent where it depends on what they go in the expansion. But my point is that this Jets team, even though I would love to see a lot of big free agent gets, big trades, trades because I love those type of things in hockey, and they're fun to look at, dissect, and get excited for to watch those players come in and make those impacts. But when I look at this team right now, I look at what they got in the cabinet, what they got on the ice currently. They got a Vezina winning goaltender, a top 5 talent, you could argue, in the entirety of the NHL, a great center in Blake Wheeler, a guy who, even though he has his issues defensively and being a complete player, a guy in Kyle Connor who you know is a 30 guy, a seasoned goal scorer, which is huge for any team trying to win. No matter what your thoughts are about him, having him signed is a positive for goal scoring when you lose Laine. Vesalainen's got a good shot. There's a lot of good potential with this group of prospects and the current guys we have. The big change going into next season is going to be whether or not we have the same faces behind the bench, because if we do, we're going to see the exact same Jets team collapse and get nowhere next year, because Paul Maurice is the reason this team is being failed at this point, in my opinion. I know we have differences there, Ryan, about the heart and the mentality that this team had in the playoffs, but when I look at everything that has been done this past season, and even going back and further dissecting it and looking at everything in new light, I think Paul Maurice needs to go for this team to get any better.
Well, it's interesting you bring up Maurice, because there's a couple cool articles floating around from MIT that break down the data and the stats about do coaching changes affect professional sports teams. And the resounding answer is no, but I'm actually going to agree with you on this one, Jake. And it's not because I don't think Paul Maurice isn't a good coach.
I think
it's
he's
more
a good coach
because,
too, actually. I'd like to point that out.
Yeah, it's more, I think after the amount of time that he's had there, eventually your voice loses weight and people stop paying attention, which is why this podcast ends up working, for instance. You know,
Exactly.
we spend all the time in the world talking on our channels, but when it's broken up by another voice, humans just tend to pay attention more.
Mm-hmm.
So that said, who are you hoping for? Because it's likely going to come either internally within the system or not. Do you think it's Huddy? Do you think it's Lowry?
I don't think you want it to be Huddy.
I personally, I think if Paul Maurice goes, Charlie Huddy should be going as well, because I'm not sure exactly on the numbers exactly if it's a full decade or if it's 9 years or whatever, but if I'm not mistaken, Charlie Huddy has been here almost since the start of our inaugural season, and nothing has changed defensively. And I think when you look at the Jets, even in their best years, their defense has always been their biggest issue, and even when they've had pretty good guys back there, they still haven't been a consistent defensive, structural core, and they just have a lot of problems, and they've been always liable at times defensively. So I think if you gut, Paul Maurice, take out Charlie Huddy, and honestly, I think you go internal. I like what the Moose have been able to do the last few seasons. There's been a lot of good guys, like look at Sam Unique, you look at other players that have developed very well on the Moose. Now I know the AHL is a different game, so that these guys might be able to thrive better there than they would in the NHL, but I still think player development is similar in the AHL with getting those guys ready to that speed compared to where they are as prospects. I think that could be an interesting transition to have Pascal Vincent come in from the Manitoba Moose and just try him out and see what works, because he's already internal. He's very familiar with almost every single player on the Jets, because as we all know, we're drafting development. A lot of our stars are Moose alumni. You see that every time on Instagram when they talk about alumni, Jets games, whatever. The Moose guys, the Moose produce all the Jets. Bringing up a guy that a lot of those players are familiar with, a guy like Perfetti, Heinola coming up too, the youth, I think there's a lot of potential in that. I think that could be an interesting situation the Jets could look at themselves, because they have a guy knocking on the door in their own organization who I think has an NHL future as a coach.
Yeah, I would say it's weird, because looking at coaches, I think it's a little more. I think the Jets, while limited in who we can pick up in terms of players, I think coaching we have a slightly larger scope. It's slight though. It's still not. We don't get to pick pretty much anybody out of a hat, whoever we want. But there's still options out there. I wouldn't hate the idea of it's weird. It's one of those things where it's I don't know what this team looks like without Paul Maurice. So I don't know how much positive influence he's having on this team compared to where they could be. And it's weird because if you look at the Canadians, for example, when they made the coaching change, it was not seen as the most appropriate time, especially in the immediate aftermath, because Ducharme went pretty much 500, I think. And Julien had been over 500. He hadn't been that high over 500, but he'd been about 500. And so going into the playoffs, the coaching was a big problem, but it almost became a benefit because the coaching got better, but also, too, the coaching realized that they could just roll 4 lines. The Canadians just rolled their entire team evenly. I think they talked about it in Game 4, but, they had the lowest guy was Josh Anderson, least amount of minutes, but he had 13 minutes. Highest minutes, Philip Deneau with 18. Because he's a shutdown center. That is something that I feel like as Jets fans, we've kind of wanted to see, but because of this internal hierarchy of who plays what line and what line plays it in what situation, it seems like it hasn't been met yet.
Well, Paul Maurice
Like,
is notorious for rolling out 3 lines of hockey and not a complete 4. He's notorious for that. There's a reason why our 4th line is a veteran presence with guys that only play 6 to 7 minutes of ice time a game. And it isn't because they don't play good hockey, because I can make the argument that Trevor Lewis in the playoffs was pretty good for us at times defensively, and I would argue could have been better used at times, but we didn't see that because, like I said, Paul Maurice knows where that 4th line's role is, and we see it with young guys and we see it with vets. It doesn't really change throughout how he plays them because it's just a line that's meant to kind of be a placeholder for the top 3 to get rest, and like that.
So
Well,
if you're saying that, I just want to say, I'm just questioning one thing. So like,
Yeah.
if you're saying that, if you want to run, so if we're running, so assuming Paul Maurice doesn't do too much to the 4th line, like technically you have to re-sign. I'm pretty sure everyone on the 4th line. I don't see that happening, especially with Perot, for example. Like I see us walking away from Perot, or he takes a Spezza contract. Is pretty much the only thing I see it working.
Oh,
But
yeah.
like, would you rather? So would you want to see that if we, assuming that they can get them to run 4 lines evenly, would you then want to spread out the youth amongst those
100%.
lines, like kind of like what Suzuki, Kotkaniemi, Caulfield kind of
Well,
do as
I
well?
think that kind of brings us into another area we can talk about. I have right now the Jets' upcoming UFAs and RFAs on my screen, and the UFA section goes as follows: Paul Stastny, Matthew Perot, Nate Thompson, Trevor Lewis, Jordy Ben, Derek Forbert, Tucker Pullman, and Lauren Brossoit. On your RFA side, you only have 3: Kopp, Pionk, and Logan Stanley. Arguably the 2 biggest being RFAs, but you could also make the argument that Paul Stastny had a pretty good year as well. But when I look at that list, other than maybe a guy like Paul Stastny and even Matthew Perot on minimum deals, or Paul Stastny being a very affordable 1-year type of deal, do you see any of those guys even returning to the Jets? Because personally, I think the youth replaces almost everyone on that roster just defensively alone. Jordy Ben won't be back, maybe Tucker Pullman for depth, but guys like Billy Noah should be pushing this roster. So
I
if
don't
you
want
have that
him to
much
be
overturn with internally, that's a good thing. So I think the Jets still need a guy, maybe for that top 4, just as a placeholder. Not a guy like Derek Forbert type placeholder, but a guy that can be consistent. And that's why I think they should keep Dylan DeMello. But I think that this is kind of an interesting situation the Jets find themselves in, because Paul Stastny and Perot together is, like, if I'm not mistaken, $11.5 or $10.5 million. That's a ton of cap you have. And Neil Pionk and Andrew Kopp are both very interesting pieces, because Andrew Kopp, do you keep him because of where he's good year? How much do you pay? And also Neil Pionk's interesting as well, because he's been very, very good for us and a very, very one of the best power play defensemen in the NHL. So what do you do? Where do you divide the money? And who do you keep? And what's your guys' kind of roster, just going in off of what these guys the players are losing? Who do you keep?
How many years does Appleton have? Just wondering.
Appleton has 1 more year left currently, and I believe he's making either a mill or no. He'll be a UFA, I believe. I can pull up friendly, but I will double check.
Yeah, just to take a peek.
Because that's one of the selling. You, Ryan. Who would you be curious to see come in on that roster, on that UFAs? Excuse me. Who do you think the Jets would keep out of any of those guys, and where do you think the youth kind of replaces the players that are leaving this team currently?
Well, for me, it really depends what happens. If Maurice doesn't get changed, I think you can assume that a guy like Derek Forbert and likely Paul Stastny are coming back, and maybe even Perot in a team-friendly deal. I think what ended up really biting the Jets in the butt this year is the fact that because we didn't commit to the young guys early in the season and get them those 52 games of experience. I'm talking about Hanola. I mean, think about how much better Stanley would have been had he had more ice time. And Stanley's a stud. Anybody who thinks Stanley's coming in as a 5-6 in the NHL anymore is dead wrong. He's a 3-4. He might finish his career as a borderline number 2 at this point, the way he's performing. So you got to get these guys the reps like the Canadians got for Caulfield and they got for KK and other players. You got to be able to trust them down the line. We talked about Chicago just earlier in this, where we said, the youth and the ELCs from there got plugged in to fill holes. You can see the confidence other teams have when doing that. So I would really like to see a coaching change to, say, like a Dave Lowry, who has been very good with young kids and World Juniors. I think that's why they brought Dave Lowry in. I think there's a world here where this could be like an A1 club where Dave Lowry and Luc Dubois' dad are coaching their kids. But I mean, it's
I wouldn't be opposed to it. I wouldn't be opposed to it.
I wouldn't be opposed to Dave Lowry because he develops youth and he plays a very tough, gritty style. And I think he's won at every level he's been at, especially internationally. He knows how to put people together. So now to answer your question, for me, I would like to see Stastny re-signed, but people keep talking team-friendly deal. If Stasny's coming in at $5 million plus, which he is on a 1 year, we can afford him. That's it. It's only a 1 year. Okay. But But if he wants long term, then you have to lock him in for 3.5. And I don't think he's going to do that. I
No.
really don't. And I don't know if a guy at 35, 36 years old is going to want a 1 year
He'll
deal.
be
So
36 in
I am,
December. That's a very
yeah,
old
so
for 3 years.
I'm 30% that Paul Stasny's going to stay. I'd like him to stay, but I think we're wishing for too much. So that being said, Vesalainen needs to make this roster. He looked like a rock star when he was in. He's a big body that needs to get reps. We know, according to the Kraken draft, in our opinion, I think it is going to be either Kopp, it's going to be Appleton, or it's going to be DeMello. But here's the crazy thing. It could actually be any one of the three because all three could be exposed if we sign Paul Stasny. You sign Paul Stasny, now it's Kopp, Appleton, and DeMello exposed, and that's a really good shopping list for the Kraken. So Stasny ends up doing some interesting stuff to us in that sense. But I think Vesalainen, Perfetti's got to get in there. I really want Gustafsson to take that fourth line
Me
center
too.
role. And Harkins just has to be a regular fixture on the roster at this point
Mhm.
because he has potential to move down. And then the defense to me is really easy. I would pair Morrissey together with Stanley on his off wing. I really would. I'd pair Hanola together with Pionk, or you could switch. You could switch Stanley and put him with Pionk and put Hanola with Morrissey just because skill is good with skill. I'm fine with that too. And then on your kind of bottom six, I'm assuming DeMello is going to stay. Like I don't think he's going to
Mhm.
get picked up if Kopp and Appleton are available.
100%
And then
on that one, yeah.
yeah, and then from there you got to add a Sandberg to that because he's got to make the roster at this point. And then you end up with Chisholm or Beaulieu or somebody like that for just
Don't
one
touch
last year.
Beaulieu.
Yeah,
Don't
no,
play
you don't.
that
I
boy.
know, but
Don't
one of
play
these,
that boy.
You know what,
one of these plugs is coming back.
I will say one thing about Nathan Beaulieu. And I know. Look, I criticize Nathan Beaulieu, and listeners, you know this more than
He's
probably
the
any
reason
three
I
of
have a
us.
plunger.
I know, but I gotta say this one thing about Nathan Beaulieu. Before Paul Maurice tried to use him as a number one defenseman, when he played on the third pairing for us, when he was a bottom pairing guy, a guy who was just for use for depth, he was respectable for us. There's a reason why we re-signed him. He wasn't terrible. It was only terrible when he was given way too much of responsibility. So if he's playing in a limited role, like what Ryan said, I wouldn't be opposed to keeping Nathan Beaulieu, especially if it's on a contract even less than what he was on at 1.25 this year. So if you get him even cheaper, I'm for that, honestly. I wouldn't be.
You guys,
I'm
you
fine
guys
with
gotta
that, but
think-
that's Paul Maurice. Like Paul Maurice is going to play him first line.
you got to think though that you've got Forbert, Beaulieu, Ben's out, like he hates Winnipeg. Forbert, Beaulieu, Poolman, all kind of that same defenseman, that 7-8 kind of defenseman in the NHL, maybe 6 on a good day, that could all come in for a really cheap deal of like $1 million less. And you got to know Winnipeg's going to go with the depth because we always have injuries. The problem is that I think fans want these guys in for depth. But then if Maurice stays, Maurice is going to play him, and Sandberg ain't getting in the lineup.
Exactly, the youth will become the depth.
Yeah, which is the incorrect way to do this. So
100%, and I think it's showing. I really do, with especially the playoff performance. When you look at what the roster you were playing up against the Habs and what you had, I think it really shows where the youth kind of killed the Jets from the Habs' point of view.
Well, what line on the Habs killed us? It was their fourth line.
Exactly.
I mean,
And
where
was so good?
Somebody tell me where Winnipeg was when Eric Stahl was being traded. Someone tell me where Winnipeg was when Corey Perry was getting league minimum. Corey
Perry's a playoff player.
Yeah, for $1 to $1.5 million, you could have doubled his Habs salary. We had so much cap space going into that. But instead, we went with Thompson and Lewis on a professional tryout. Why do you even bother with Lewis on a pro tryout? Bring in Perry, pay him a little money.
Lewis
Perry had a money year with the Stars. I don't understand.
I don't know why I defend Lewis because I wasn't a big fan of him being signed and given that. I was a big fan. Let me rephrase that. I was a big fan of him being signed. Wasn't a really big fan of him being a consistent staple on that fourth line. But I did think Lewis brought something to this team in the regular season, and I thought he was a good presence. You could definitely just see something within the guys that played with him, especially the youth. They had good games, I felt like, when you saw them get injected with him. I'm not saying keep him, but I even though I'm not disagreeing with you, Coach, about bringing in Corey Perry, obviously a much better player than you're getting with with Lewis, but I think Lewis was a good positive on this team this year, I will say. Nate Thompson was basically, he cancels out. I feel like he wasn't horrible, he wasn't terrible guy, but he wasn't amazing either. Just kind of a
Lewis was
player.
better, yeah.
But Lewis was definitely impactful at times, and I'm definitely happy with his presence. But I want to actually ask you guys this because we were talking about this with players coming back. We know this franchise is way more loyal than a lot of other franchises, especially with players and guys
Yes.
that want to stay long term. Dylan DeMello has made it very clear in his exit interviews the reason why he signed, and especially with the last 48 hours, that he loves the city of Winnipeg, he loves the province, and he wants to stay with this organization. On Twitter, he went out and talked about how it was a tough year, but how he loves this organization. It's the best organization he's ever played before. He loves all the players and the staff, and he hopes that everything will stay the way he wants to. Dylan DeMello is basically just pleading to the organization to let him stay, and I know, Ryan, you don't think he would, or there's a good chance he could get exposed, but I ask you from this standpoint, because there are a lot of fans that genuinely just don't like DeMello, think he's very overrated, and they want him gone. Do you guys want DeMello because, one, he's got a pretty good contract for what he brings, and two, because he's a good fit for this team defensively, or do you just want him gone because you think he's, if we had to pick between Appleton and Kopp, you'd rather, DeMello go compared to those guys? Because personally, with the way the defense is, I think it's defensive defenseman like DeMello, who wants to be here, is a pretty valuable asset. I'm going to turn that over to you, Zach. Curious on your thoughts about that.
So I would say, yeah, I agree. I would definitely want him to stay. I think with him, and my problems with him basically in the early half of the season was he didn't really have a consistent person to play with. Like they kind of just like cycling him between, because what they did was they set up Forbert and Pionk. That was the only line that was consistent the entire season.
Weird when you think.
And then they just said, yeah, right. It's like, okay, so that's your second pair is Forbert. Okay, cool. But then like Heinola, Jomo, and Stanley, I'll play left side. But no, let's put Forbert second. Not the point. But like with DeMello, he kind of shifted around between him and Pullman, and there was like Beaulieu in there on the left side, and like he doesn't really have a spot to play in that was very like
that's just the
suited for him.
Though, when you really
I agree. But like the thing is that I see now is that as the season wore on, it showed a lot more how we needed a guy like DeMello in there. Because especially in that Montreal series, think about how many goddamn odd man rushes we gave up.
Yep.
Think about how many times a stay-at-home defenseman wouldn't have pinched when all the other people pinched.
Yep.
Like, it's just simple plays. And is he a safe guy? Yeah. But in the playoffs, I want a safe defenseman. Like, I want a guy like a DeMello or a Joel Edmondson who won't play up, but they'll try to shut down as much as they can. I think with Kopp and Appleton, who are the two names floated for the offense, I hate to say it because I really do enjoy both those players and they're very endearing to this franchise. But they are people that I actually think are kind of just disposable. Like they've had amazing seasons. Don't get me wrong. But I think that I can equally imagine having younger guys on our team having just as great seasons if they're played properly in general. Like,
so Zach,
yes.
Zach, you know what those guys are actually qualified under when you take a look at advanced stats? Very similar to when another hometown hero, Brandon Tanev, walked away.
Yep.
And we didn't want to sign them. They're actually called replaceable players. And it's not because they're bad. It's because you can find similar production for less money on both those players. So yes, I love them both too.
Appleton's literally a Brandon Tanev.
Yeah.
Like he's literally the redo.
He's
like we just don't talk about it.
Tanev.
Kopp's a little better than people give him credit for, but Kopp's probably looking for $3.5-4 million. He's probably worth.
He's went to arbitration twice, so he's definitely looking for a pay raise.
Yeah, and we don't need the space on the top six. Like where a guy like Andrew Kopp fits in really, really well is a team like Pittsburgh or Boston when they lose Taylor Hall or one of their guys.
Boston would look very good for Kopp, I'm going to be honest.
Yeah. So they'll pay him the money. Somebody out there will pay him the money because it's a veteran-heavy team that needs to plug in a winger in the top six. Winnipeg doesn't need to plug in someone in the top six right now, especially with the rookies and what they have. Exactly. You have Vesalainen, and you have so many people that can see.
They re-signed another guy from the AHL too as well. I forget who it was.
Yeah,
there's
totally
a bunch of people there.
Yeah,
there's so much room.
That's a good situation that us as Jets fans can find us in. And that's kind of what I've been doing since, probably you guys as well, since that horrible round 2, is just trying to find some positive in the dark right now. Look and see what type of path this organization it can follow and take. And there are lots presented in this offseason, a lot of interesting stories to be following as well. And I really do think that this team is actually in a good situation for once, because they actually they failed miserably on a stage where they haven't really failed at before. With you look at the media attention that was given to them in that second round and how bad everything that just happened, the fallout that happened. So that's good, because now you have the spotlights on Winnipeg a little bit on this offseason. What are you going to do to fix that and how bad you were? So maybe change is finally due. It's been so stuck in mediocrity for a long time and I think we finally have cap space too. We're not a free agent, Ben, and I'm not talking about going out and offering Seth Jones and Dougie Hamilton $9.5 million each and building through free agency, but we have the ability to actually look and maybe overpay for some guys, a couple mil here and there that could help, good youth, good veteran, not veteran guys that we've signed in the past, but guys that can actually help this team. So I think that there's a lot of potential in that. Please take it away, Ryan.
I have to cut you off on it because I've done the math on year 2. We have cap space next year, right? Almost $10 million, but it is completely eaten up by Pionk and Pierre-Luc Dubois. So unfortunately,
well, PLD's got 1 year left,
PLD
doesn't he?
isn't staying, I don't believe.
So, but I'm saying I don't think we traded for him to let him walk. He's an RFA.
I agree.
I think we're gonna pay him. I think Pionk's due for a $6 to $6.5 million like
Wow.
Josh Morris.
But isn't Pionk this year and PLD's next year?
Correct. So even though you signed that, though, that PLD contract is what's going to eat it up after Pionk. So the reality is you have 2 choices here. 3 actually, when you do the math. You can re-sign Andrew Kopp to $4 million and let Appleton walk and let Stasny walk. You can re-sign Stasny to $5.5 million for 1 year and let him walk. Or you can let both walk and have, just enough cap space to go ahead and deal with, a $7 to $8 million PLD contract and a $6 to $6.5 million Neil Pionk contract.
Okay.
And if you don't think those are the numbers, they're probably pretty close.
I disagree with Pionk a little bit. But just
PLD's number seems high, and he needs to play up to it.
Because he needs to play up to that. Personally, for me, I wouldn't offer PLD more than $5 million for what I saw from him last year, and even the year after that. I think his current contract is very valuable because PLD has had some great playoff performances and some good runs, but consistency has lacked him even in Columbus. He hasn't been an amazing elite talent in the NHL, just a good top 6 center. So and I know he's going to get better. I know that, but looking at what I saw this year, I am skeptical.
You got to remember, though, this is how Chevy gets his deals and how Winnipeg gets things done. He's a gambling man a bit on this. So if you want to get PLD locked in, this is actually the year to do it on a down year. If PLD was smart, he would say, no, I'm going to play out 1 more year and I'll see. But if Chevy can dangle that 6 years, $7 to $8 million in front of him, he'd be crazy not to take it after that year. And that's how you end up with a steal of a deal like a Shifley deal.
Or you end up with a guy like Clayton Keller.
Yeah, but that's the risk you take when you're in small market like Winnipeg.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
So it'll be interesting to see how Chevy handles it. But yeah, I mean, I do think both PLD and Pionk are in the long-term future of the Jets.
Pionk has to be.
And it's like what I come back to what I just said is that they've got so many different paths in front of them when they look at things like, next year, and like talking about PLD. And you're right, Ryan. Chevy could go out right now and be like, I'm going to sign whatever I can to get some good term on these guys while we have Shifley and Connor and Hellebuck locked up, and go out and try to fill out the rest of the lineups through prospects and anyone else that you could really find that's serviceable at a good price in free agency, because the Jets aren't a number 1 free agency, Ben, but they have been able to get some good pickups in the past. Matthew Pro, for example, was a very good underrated free agents pickup that we got way back when after he left Anaheim, and that was a very good, it worked out for us. He had some very good years for us being an underrated guy in that top 6, and he's been able to play everywhere for us and be consistent for us, even though being an overpay for a little bit, for a long time, I would argue. So I think that there are guys like Matthew Pro you could go out and get in free agency, but I think that the Jets, like you said, Ryan, and like me, we're all preaching right now, promote from the inside like your identity is, draft and develop is what your name is, and go with that, because that's basically the only way you can get really good talent to stay long term is if you bring them through your own system and give them good development, like we've seen with Shifley, Hellebuck, Morrissey, even if you're going to argue about Morrissey, but Kyle Connor as well. Guys, look at Kyle Connor's contract, for example, 7.1 for what you can get from him. If he can finally work on his game and become a little bit more of a two-way threat, just a little bit more responsible defensively, that contract is only going to get better, and he's 24 years old.
Yep.
So I see where you're going from there with Ryan with getting these guys on long-term deals. PLD, we differ there on, but I do see the appeal, and I do know why Chevy does it. So I think, like I said, with a lot of directions to go for. What are your kind of talks to take right now, though, with the opponents you're going to be facing next year? Because we played the North Division was a very easy division for teams like Toronto, for teams like the Jets at times, even though we struggled against certain opponents. Going back to a standings next year, we're going to have to play in the Central, when you're going to have to play teams like the Avalanche, when you're going to have to play the Minnesota up and coming down there with their young team. What do you want to see that kind of happen with the identity of this club? Because we talked about Paul Maurice moving on. What would you want to see the shift in identity be going into the Central next year with all the teams we're going to have to play considering what we just had to deal with in the North?
So, I think what this team needs is an actual identity. I think with this team, especially this year, especially as the playoffs went on, this team kind of lost a bit of their identity. They kind of got stuck between, do we want to be a team that's kind of slow and like a tough team to play against, like offensively, or is it a team that is based on speed and stuff like that? And I feel like we really lost that identity, at least in the sense of like for example, Canadians are a flawed team, but they know exactly who they are. Their defense is not fast. Their defense is a tough team to play against. Their offense is speed, is unbelievable speed, and it's played equally, and that kills. The Jets just need to have that identity. And if we're looking at who we're playing in the Central, I think now we would have also the Arizona Coyotes come in as well, which isn't not to like dump on Arizona, but they have their own problems. But like we'd be looking at a Chicago team that's been trying to find some younger guys to inhabit the roster, and it seems like it's been working. Although I think also too that is very
But
dependent on
that's kind of
Patrick
what
Kane.
the Jets are doing right now
Yeah,
too, just with the more
that's
youthful.
also
Not with not with youthful, but with guys that just haven't been as much successful in the past, like we've had in Chicago.
Minnesota is probably a bit on the upswing. It's
A bit.
they have a couple guys that really they should be all right. Like I don't want to say upswing and then the next year they fall right off, like because then that's not that. Colorado obviously deadly. St. Louis, I think it's tough to gauge that team honestly. Dallas, I'm not sure about. Nashville really depends on UC Soros, gonna be honest, like in the moves they make this offseason. But like, yeah, it'll be interesting, honestly. I feel like this team there's definitely a way where there's definitely a window in which they make the playoffs in there, and they're totally like talented enough to do so. I think there's going to be a lot of interesting pieces that we'll see in the offseason, though, with all of those teams in general.
Okay.
Well, I gotta tell you, Zach, I think that Minnesota is going to be a juggernaut. I really think they're
I'm not saying they're not. I'm just see.
I think it's very interesting playing in that division next year because you have Colorado, who is highly skilled, highly talented. They're just nearly perfect, even though they lost.
They just can't get it done.
And you have one of the biggest, baddest teams in Minnesota that will beat the crap out of you over and over again. They're playing playoff hockey from September onwards.
Exactly.
Then you have the Jets in there, and the Jets probably come in somewhere between 3 to 6. And I think what the Jets need to do, if they're going to play their youth and get ready for the playoffs, which they need to, and roll 4 lines, it's very interesting because the 4 lines don't necessarily match up to the speed and power of Colorado, and they get beaten up by Minnesota. But can Winnipeg and the coaching staff trust the process and let that happen in the regular season? Because where I'm going with this is look at the playoffs this year. The playoffs this year, to me, have proven more than ever that the regular season doesn't matter for anything but seeding and development, because teams that have gotten through in the playoffs are balanced with goaltending. They're deep. And we played, like, this is ridiculous. We played every team 10 times within our division, and the 4th place team gets through in the North. The 4th place team gets through in the East. The 3rd place team gets through in the Central, and the 2nd place team gets through. So all the first seeds are out, even though we had a massive sample size.
Mm-hmm.
Come on, 4 divisions. That's just
the only argument.
Isn't the same.
Yeah.
It's not
the only argument you can say is that technically Vegas was tied with Colorado for points. That's the only thing, though, and that's a weak case because the other 3 divisions completely changed that.
Yeah, but what that comes back to is, do you think that? Well, I'll ask you this, Ryan. Do you think that if for the Jets to be able to kind of roll with the big boys, as I like to say, for going into that division next year, do you think for them to have really good success if they roll in the same type of roster they have now, will come down to coaching and what type of players they're rolling out? If we're seeing more vets come back, replaceable talent, that is vet replaceable talent being signed, and guys like that taking up that 4th line and 3rd line instead of the youth. Do you think that it takes a coaching staff for us to get that identity shift to be better in that division?
I don't, because I do think it's the players. So even though the trouble with Winnipeg right now, when you look up and down the rosters, there's no cup winner. Yeah. There's not a single cup winner on Winnipeg. Yes, Trevor Lewis is there, but Montreal brought in like 6 of them through free agency. Toronto did the opposite. They brought guys in hungry for cups, and look where it got them. Having veterans who have won cups are very, very important. And when I look at the leadership of the Jets, Scheifele, Morrissey, and Wheeler, they've never done it. If anything, all 3 of them have underperformed to the levels they were supposed to perform to. I like them all. But when you don't have that voice like Chicago, who had Jonathan Toews, and I get it, at first he never won a cup, but he won at every level before he got to
Yeah.
Winnipeg. He's never
Yeah.
lost.
A lot
For
of people
sure.
So
forget
he
about
had that mentality. Yeah, he's never ever lost at any level he's ever played at, including the Olympics. He's never been cut from a team either, which is incredible to
Wow,
think of.
I did not know that. That is insane to think of.
He made the Olympic men's roster on his first try.
Wow.
That was the only that was the
That's like
only time he had a
unheard
chance
of.
to cut. Yep, he's from
Wow.
literally the time he was 6 years old all the way through to the Olympics and a man, he's never been cut. Ever.
Unbelievable.
So when you have a guy like that coming into the lineup, you know why he gets called Captain Serious and why you end up winning cups. So since Winnipeg doesn't have that, could it come down to the coach? It might. That's why I think Dave Lowry might be the guy to bring in, because he's won at multiple levels. But more importantly, the Jets are going to have to figure out how to win as a group that has never won.
Yeah.
They don't have any player on that roster that I can be like, this is a winner.
And
I mean, even look at the Canadians.
Exactly.
Scheifele's never played on an Olympics and won a gold medal because he wasn't aged and they lost the Olympics.
Right.
Morris, he never won a Memorial Cup. Like if I go down that roster top to bottom, there's just nobody on it where I'm like, that's the guy that people are going to follow, you know, in
Right.
the
the
battle.
argument you can make on anybody for Winnipeg is Connor Hellebuck, and then he's a goalie, so it's like kind of shoots that logic in the foot, because we've seen how that works in the past with NHL leaders. And
What are you talking about, Jake? We are the biggest leaders in the locker room and on the ice. We scream at you from our crease, and you guys always have
that
listened to
C
us.
for so long.
Oh yes.
He's absolutely a leader, but I mean, even thinking about that line combination, Blake Wheeler needs to move down to line 2, maybe even line 3.
I
Like
agree.
spread out the vets,
Yeah.
I want to
spread
ask you a
out the
question.
rookies.
I want to ask you a question about Blake Wheeler, Ryan, and what we're talking
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
now about spreading this out. I'm under kind of the belief, and a lot of this was rage-induced. I'm not gonna lie, it was, especially with the way we lost. But even now, Calm being able to record videos about talking about the future now. I think that a leadership change in the locker room, not coaching, I'm talking about C's and A's being stripped off of jerseys because of how pathetic that performance was. Now, I'm not talking about getting rid of Blake Wheeler, because I still love Blake Wheeler. But Ryan, you've talked about this with me, I believe, at times. Guys like
This is a
Jumbo
Thornton
Joe,
moment?
yep, other type of players that have
A
been
Dustin
all-time
Brown
greats,
moment.
exactly, all-time greats, guys that have won even, have gotten them stripped at times and they've lost the room. That doesn't mean Blake Wheeler's not a good guy and a guy that players still respect in there, but maybe a shift in culture in that room, giving different letters over, could be another good type of change we can see going into a much tougher season next year, most likely, as is playing in that Central. And again, getting back to that identity shift, if we're not getting rid of new coaching, even though Paul loves his boys wearing those letters, I think that could be a good way, underrated way on helping jumpstart, maybe a new type of attitude in that locker room.
So I'm looking at the list of free agents right now, because at the end of the day, I don't think stripping Wheeler is going to be enough, because he's still in the locker room. When they stripped Marlowe and Thornton, it didn't do it. You have to trade them like Boston did. And it's not that I want to trade them, but the only way, and he's not a cancer. That's not what I'm saying. Cut the cancer.
Right.
I'm saying the only way to get an actual shift in leadership is to take the head of the snake, which is Wheeler, out and move him around. Now, can you trade him for another captain? Because I don't see anyone behind Wheeler that is a captain. I don't see
You'd be
Scheifele
lucky
as a
if
captain.
Seattle took him in the expansion draft with that
Yeah,
contract and age.
But contract aside, I mean, I think some teams would take him, to be honest. But I don't see you getting leadership back, because I don't see any leadership in the Jets not named Paul Stastny. So that means you have to go looking for maybe a Travis Zajac as a cheap add-in to bring in some leadership. He's never won a cup, but he's been to them. I don't think you're going to get Getzlaff or Perry, who are free agents, away from where they're at. You might be able to get Perry.
I don't think
Eric
the
Stahl's
organization
another
would suit
guy.
Perry.
Isn't that a hard sell though? Like bringing in a guy and then immediately making him the captain?
No, it depends
Or
who
like-
the guy
or-
is.
It's the
Especially if he's won a Stanley Cup before. If you're bringing in a past Stanley Cup NHL All-Star and he's auto seed, it happens.
I will just
Okay.
say one thing.
It can blow things
Mark
up. Matt
Messier is a
Sundin.
really bad
Mark
example of that when he
Messier.
came over to Vancouver. As a Canuck fan, I
Yep.
will say that was a horrible, horrible move by the organization.
Yeah, but that's because you had a good captain already in Trevor Linden.
Yep.
To
And-
strip him
yeah.
was stupid.
Yeah,
That was
in the way they
Ugh.
do, and then ship him off like that to the Islanders.
That was dumb. That was dumb.
Ugh.
But I mean, if the Jets need leadership, I'm looking at the free agent pool. I see Zajac, I see Stahl, I see Perry, guys that we may be able to get. That may be what you have to do. But if you can't do that, then I guess you just leave the C on Wheeler.
Well, what if you okay, maybe not stripping, maybe we go with the direction that a lot of teams that are younger are doing. What if you go with 3 A's? You take away that, like, take away the C from Wheeler, and you give him maybe even an A, and then you take away the A, and you split up the A's. I'm just trying to spitball. I think that could be another good kind of look for this team, because then you have guys trying to fight and build a case for them to be the leaders of this club in the future, because they haven't, like you said, they have no winners on their team right now when it comes to NHL success, other than Hellebuck, really. And I think that could be a good fight for some of these guys like Scheifele, who after a very controversial end to the season, all the hate he's been getting in the media, a guy who was, expected to be captain by everyone. Now there's all this question around him, and I'm not saying he's, doesn't deserve it still, but
the question is mostly outside of Winnipeg.
Exactly. The fact is there's conversations about him not deserving it now. So maybe motivating these guys to show why they deserve that C and why they deserve the letter on their jersey in the first place is a good kind of start for this culture and this change in identity. Because that's another thing I wanted to talk about as well. I felt there was a lot of excuses being made by this club in their exit interviews. Last 48 hours, I feel like they've been being posted on social media, and that's something that I'm a little bit upset at, because excuses are excuses. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You failed. There was no heart, and the excuses I've heard from some of the players have been very lackluster. And we wanted to talk about some of the other types of things those players have said as well that are not even excuses when it comes to Connor Hellebuck even calling us a dynasty in the making. So there are a lot of interesting things we can talk about there. I want to throw it over to you, Ryan. Do you think that maybe that A idea would work, considering where we're at right now in the media and all the attention on us, and the fact that we haven't had a lot of success with the leaders we have?
No, and now that I've come off the ledge after a couple days, I did think, like, initially I was like, this could be not a bad idea, but I've kind of flipped now, just because there's no replacement leader in the room, and all you're going to do is piss off one guy. And I think Wheeler has a grouping of players that follow him no matter what.
He does,
Scheifele's
100%.
his right-hand man.
Oh,
and
yeah.
The room's got a weird divide, like the Blake Wheeler group and everybody else. So if you strip them of a C, you're just going to piss off that group, and then the other group's going to laugh and be pissed off, and then it's just not going to solve anything, because there's no one in waiting. Like when the Sharks did it, it went from Marlowe to Thornton because you had a captain to a captain, and then Thornton didn't work out, so they stripped Thornton, and then it just went too far down the rabbit hole.
Well, it went to Pavelski, and Pavelski was the right call, I think, though, as well.
Yeah. But I mean, still no Stanley Cup for Joe there either. So
none of them.
If you think about it, I just really think the biggest thing the Jets are missing isn't a free agent or a rookie. It's lack of player leadership that knows how to win.
So then who?
And I don't know how to fix that.
Well,
I don't know.
I think the easiest answer is win with what you got.
But I mean, if you can get Eric Stahl, you go get Eric Stahl.
100%. I agree.
Yes,
I agree.
So much.
I think he would come here too. Eric Stahl's the type of guy that would come here, I think, because I don't
you
think
couldn't
Eric
get him
Stahl's
for
the type of
third
guy.
and a fifth.
Well, not even that. Well, that's a different.
That was
that's
what
a
it was.
whole different discussion.
That was what it was. Okay, but still, like I would get rid of depth pickups. Our drafting is solid enough as it is that I trust them with the limited draft picks they would have left.
I feel like that was more of just Chevy not wanting to deal with the 2-week quarantine at the time that was implemented, because he'd already had to deal with that PLD, and that blew up for the Jets, and not the best way with injuries and stuff. So I think that's a big reason why we didn't see more type of acquisitions and Chevy really going out and making the big offers for guys at the deadline, even though regardless of whether or not was the right decision or not. I think that's one of the reasons why was really the quarantine after what happened with PLD really put a damper on him. It doesn't have to do with he was, not willing to make the offers, but 2 weeks without a guy is a huge loss to your club after getting him.
Yep. Yeah, like it's tough. And so you talked about the dynasty question, and I actually mentioned this as a joke before we recorded, but it's like, is this dynasty going to become, because we know what we want it to be, or at least what Hellebuck thinks it can be, and that is the Chicago, honestly the Pittsburgh, the LA dynasty, or is it going to be the San Jose dynasty? And for the record, San Jose was a consistently good team. Would you
rather have a decade of good hockey or a cup?
No. I agree. I agree with you. I'm just saying that there is if you think about it too, the comparisons that you can draw with this team and that San Jose team is a little scary at times, because you think about being able to bring up guys from development very well. Kevin Labanc, Hurdle, Couture, like Timo Meyer. There were guys that were brought up from that system, and the odd guy that they pick up from via trading, like Evander Kane. You see those pieces, and like San Jose fielded a great team a lot of times, but there was always one thing that stopped them every time, and every time it was different. And I feel like the Jets at this point are a couple steps ahead of them, even though they have never made a cup final, because there are a few things that you can count on. The biggest thing is Connor Hellebuck. For Hellebuck's worst season in the last 4 years was arguably the year where we lose to the St. Louis Blues, I would say. That was easily his worst year. And even still, he was safely above 900. And honestly, when Hellebuck started really having a lot more struggle in net, it was near the tail end. Like, it wasn't like for a complete season we were just like, well, this team is screwed. What are we going to do now? No, it was just, okay, he's not playing as godly as we require from him. So what? And that was a bad year in general. It was a lot of transition period, especially going out of it. But, like, I see what Hellebuck is saying, and I like his confidence in being able to say that. I think it's a quote that has been, I don't want to say misrepresented, but taken a lot more seriously than it needed to. Because it's at face value, it's that. But beyond that, it's him saying, I have faith in this team being able to win a Stanley Cup. And this team being able to be competitive for a long time and win a Stanley Cup. And that's a fair statement, honestly. Because this team has at least 3 years left in a presumptive window. Assuming
I like to call it the Blake Wheeler window, where you actually get the last
pretty
bit
much
of productive hockey from Blake Wheeler.
Look
before
at
he hits
cap
the
friendly.
massive decline.
It's a safe line that everyone's contracts pretty much end at the same time.
Yeah,
and then you just blow everything up.
It's the Connor Hellebuck, Mark Scheifele window. So when he talks about a dynasty, 3 years isn't long enough to get a dynasty unless you win 3 cups in a row, Connor. So unless Hellebuck or Scheifele are going to take the Nathan McKinnon team-friendly deal back to back, and I don't know if they're going to do it because they're on team-friendly ones right now.
It's easy to say you're making a team-friendly deal when you're living in Denver. I'm just going to say that. Like, no offense to Nathan McKinnon, so much props for him, and I'm impressed with him being able to state that at his talent. But it's easier to say it there than it is in other locations.
If things keep going forward, Scheifele's going to look at 8 to 10 million, and Hellebuck is going to look at 10 million north.
Yeah, for sure.
So you got a 3-year
That's a lot for a goalie, but yes,
yeah,
it's definitely
a 3-year window to win 1 cup.
Oh, he's the best goalie. Okay, so like let's get this out of the way. Carey Price not maybe stifled this offense. He didn't outduel Connor Hellebuck.
No, he didn't.
Like, Connor Hellebuck didn't have I could count maybe one goal I didn't like with Connor Hellebuck, and that was the rebound goal by Gallagher in game 1. That's maybe the only goal that I actually don't like, is on bad rebound control. Other than that, no bad goals.
Honestly, I can't even talk to you guys about that series. I've done so much therapy by myself.
Oh,
to
that's
that out.
That's fine. That's totally fine.
Because I want to kind of throw this at that kind of, the dynasty thing over at Coach, just to quickly kind of give your opinions on it still. Do you think that, we've been talking about a lot of different opportunity and paths the Jets have in front of them right now. What do you think, kind of just to sum up your thoughts, Coach, on what the Jets need to do to make Hellebuck's comments a little bit more of a reality than, just being a fantasy?
Well, like I said, I think you got to bring in locker room leadership that isn't a really bottom 4 guy, because that's all we've done with Matt Hendricks and Trevor Lewis, and that does nothing. I really do think that it probably requires a coaching change, which they're likely not going to do. And it requires playing the kids through the entirety of the year with balanced lines and move guy like Wheeler to the second or the third line, move Ehlers up to the first line.
Just play them all equally.
The second line. Exactly.
And it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what line you're on, because you're getting the same minutes.
Exactly.
Well, here's where lines matter, Zach. They matter when it comes to what speed you're going to play at. You can't mix slow players with fast players.
Yeah, and area-based play, like certain situational.
There has to be a level of speed. So if you're going to put a young guy up on line 1 and take Wheeler off, it has to be someone like a Vesalainen or a Perfetti that can play at that speed with Ehlers and Scheifele. And that's what I would do. I'd put one of those young kids up on 1 with Ehlers, Scheifele. Then I would go ahead on line 2, and I'd go ahead and put Wheeler and Dubois together, because I think they play at the same speed. I do.
Dubois
I think they're
fast,
a little bit slower.
I agree.
No, so
he's very methodical when he skates.
Yep. If Stasny stays, he can stay on that line too, because that's a nice veteran line. But you're likely going to put Kyle Connor there. However, crazy thought, how about Connor, Appleton, or Kopp, whoever ends up staying, and Lowry? I know that sounds nuts, but if you're rolling all 3 equally anyway...
I've been preaching that for a while now, to try and experiment with Kyle Connor in that type of role.
If you're going to roll all 3 anyway, what's the difference?
There is none.
You need scoring on all 3 lines, and I agree that Connor, like, if you put Perfetti with Lowry and that's okay, but then do you really trust it? You need leadership in those vet guys on each line. So if you got to put Connor with Wheeler and Dubois, go for it, but I think he's wasted there because he's too fast.
I agree with that. I really like a lot, because when you look at what Blake Wheeler brings, you can make the argument that he's better suited for a third line guy, not because he's an bad player, but because of the speed that we're talking about and what he how like there's so many examples where you can look at the Jets last season and you can just look at Blake Wheeler on that top line with Kyle Connor and Scheifele, where they had good looks, and if they had the ability to move the puck quickly, they could get into the zone and make good opportunities. But Blake Wheeler has slowed down a lot in the last couple of years. That has been a very big area of his decline. Has been speed. You can see it with the way he doesn't drive to the net, the way how he holds the puck in the corners. Everything about his game with the speed side of it has really kind of disappeared almost. So I think that's another thing we should be talking about. Is we're talking about how we believe that for this team to kind of accelerate and take it to the next step, a coaching change is probably in order. But since most likely, as Jets fans, we're being realistic, we don't probably see a coaching change happening. What happens with that top line? Because we've seen time and time again, it doesn't matter how bad they are not broken up. And this kind of comes back to the whole the coaching argument, because it's a very interesting one. Because we all agree that a coaching change is probably the best direction for this team if you're not going to change any big pieces and trade them off. But if we don't, realistically, the Jets aren't probably going to do that. Everything most likely is going to stay very similar to what we've seen, because look at the years of decline we've seen the last few. It's been bad every year with bad play from these guys, and they haven't seen any change, even in the regular season. So do you think that maybe this was a wake-up call for Paul Maurice to maybe experiment more and move guys around and not be so stubborn and setting guys up and playing them where they are? Or do you think that we're going to see more or less the same type of things going forward? Because I feel like if we do, the Jets are shooting themselves in the foot before game one and is played before the regular season if you roll out with Paul Maurice in the same type of lines.
So I'm going to say no, because the coaches don't really have a lot of time to do what's called like professional development and change up their style, because the league and the season is so long. So the issue with it is coaches only usually start really changing their formula and their adaptation when they get fired or let go and have a year or two off to retool and really watch hundreds of hours of tape and rethink and think about their approach to the game. He hasn't had that in 10 years. You can see he hasn't changed. Yeah. He hasn't adapted a huge amount. So I don't see him doing that without it. I think he's really well suited to go to a team. I don't know, basically every team he could go to is already veteran. It already has a veteran coach presence. So I don't know where at this point. But when I think about available coaches out there, Gallant is going to go to the Rangers.
Gallant's looking like a Ranger soon.
John Tortorella is not an answer.
No. Good job to get. Yeah, that would scare off half our roster.
And Claude Julien's out there, but Julien is more of a veteran coach than Paul Maurice is.
Yeah.
He's less of a youth developer, and that's
it's the same thing. Yeah, but they needed to get rid of Julien to be able to move on to guys like playing KK more.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about. Is that the Jets are, and that's kind of a problem then, Ryan. Because do you think then there's going to be any real hope of him hoping for change? Because Paul Maurice, if we know for a fact within the next few weeks that Paul Maurice is going to be staying, because let's be real, the changes at coach are going to be made before free agency, before expansion, because the new coach is going to have an identity of the club, and they're not going to want to have him come in and deal with whatever left was Paul Maurice's plan for next season. So if it happens, it's happening very soon, before I would say the expansion draft. So that gives us a little over a month, I believe. So if we don't see any news like that coming within the next month, I would say even argue a couple of weeks, we know that this team most likely will be the same type of team next year. So but again, that kind of harkens back to the whole point of everything about talking to the future. If we keep with Paul Maurice, do we actually see any of this change we're hoping for? Or is it more or less the same garbage in the definition of insanity that we saw this year at times?
Garbage in, garbage out. You just answered your own question.
Exactly. That's my whole point.
So
setting myself up.
But
there's
the
one question.
Zach jumps in though. We do know this. Cheveldayoff plays everything super close to the chest, so there will be no rumors or rumblings about this. It will just quietly happen. So there's no point even speculating on it, because he won't give us a spoiler at all.
Right.
Unfortunately.
So actually, that's a good actually lead into my question, because I've seen it brought up a lot, not as much so as the Paul Maurice conversation. What is our thoughts on Kevin Cheveldayoff? Because it feels like Kevin Cheveldayoff is a constant presence, but also too, it seems like more and more as this team not necessarily doesn't live up to their potential, but maybe doesn't live up to the potential that certain audience has set upon it. That especially after now that Pierre-Luc Dubois trade, which I wouldn't say has completely blown up in their face, but not a stunning success as prior ones. What is our thoughts on Kevin Cheveldayoff and his future with the Winnipeg Jets?
Okay, so the PLD trade, before you talk about Shovel Day Off, you have to
Mhm.
realize sometimes Winnipeg fans need to STFU because when Winnipeg fans
Oh
get
no, I
too-
agree. I
no,
agree.
but when they get too uppity, Shovel Day Off makes a move. He
Mhm.
listens to it. Do you remember when we didn't have a goalie and we needed a defenseman? We got Kulikov and Mason. Nailed that one. We had to lose our Mia for it. And that happened on public pressure.
Yes, it
I
did.
really think Shovel Day Off was happy to stand pat. He knew he was going to be fine with Hellebuck, but he gave in to public pressure because you have to appease the fans in order to keep your job. And
Mhm.
then I truly think the Line A situation ended up happening because fans, players, everybody could see the same thing. I don't like the way he skates. I don't like this. I want to bring in a grit guy. Okay, great. Go for it. And then it ends up this crap ends up happening. And I was the only person I know. I didn't have a YouTube channel at the time in my circle of friends saying this is a really stupid deal. And people were
Oh,
going,
buddy,
Welcome
buddy,
to
don't
the
worry.
family, Ryan. Welcome.
We
embrace
both
you.
we
We
both
embrace
dropped
you.
videos on that. So
you can't give up goals. It's the best trick in the NHL.
Exactly.
So and to tell me he went to Columbus and had a shitty time. Of course he had a shitty time. There's no one there to play with, and it's under Tortorella. This guy's going to score goals for the rest of his career and make somebody pay.
that's
But
such a weird trade, isn't it? Because
It
like
is.
if you look at that trade, there's one winner there, and it's none of the teams. It's
Jack
Roslovic.
Roslovic.
Roslovic's the only winner. Like not even PLD.
You know what's-
Maybe like I believe that PLD has at least roots here, and that is a possible option for him wanting to stay here long term. That being said, this trade has so far hasn't been good for him.
I'd
It
like
hasn't
to,
improved.
I'd like to
Here's
point
the
out
funny thing before
what-
you joke into that, Jake. Here's the funny thing about PLD because you guys are both young, so I don't know if you'll see this.
Okay.
When two 23 or 24-year-olds demand a trade from their boss and this happens, does that not just prove to you, like Gen Z millennial, STFU and do your job? Because both of them had big mouths, and now all of a sudden neither of them are playing for it. And it's very funny to think that everybody poops on Tortorella, yet Tortorella got the best out of PLD. So, kid, do you actually need to be kicked in the ass? Probably.
Well, remember that game where he screamed at him and then he went and got a hat trick? Like that was
That's
the
what
game.
I
Like if
mean.
you go back and watch, and they're getting into a screaming match on the bench, like after that, PLD gets 3 goals, and
Why-
they beat the Leafs in overtime.
You guys can answer this better than I can because I don't know. Why do these kids shut down and break down when they get yelled at? Yet all of a sudden you see them perform and then they still just hold that grudge. Like, why? He got the
People-
best
people
out
are
of you.
grown up,
Uh,
man. And people
like,
are brought
it's
up and
weird.
raised.
It's a weird one, like for me, because it's tougher for me to say because
Zach,
I was a
before we get into it
goalie.
too much, I just want to say one thing that I was
Yes.
trying to say before that.
Sure.
I was losing my
Sounds
train of
good.
thought because the questions are too good. Ironically, in my first real video that ever popped was a video talking about how I hated all the Line A rumors. And in that video, I was talking about the Columbus rumors at the time that had no real substance. They were just complete rumors. And I said, this trade with Columbus would absolutely never happen. You don't know why it would never happen? Because
Oh,
Columbus
gosh.
would be so stupid to trade their top line center for a winger that needs a top line center to play. Who would he play with? Why would you be shooting yourselves in the foot by getting a sniper with nobody? And I said that as a passover and a rant like 6 months ago. The truth happened, and I predicted the future on that one, boys. Literally to a T. Because it's the truth. You need a center, and it kind of comes back to how the Jets thought they needed a center and all that misidentity. But Zach, please take it away what you were talking about there. Getting back
Well,
to
like, and here's the thing, like, it's tough for me to say in some cases on that because for me, like, personally for myself, like when I was playing hockey growing up, I played as a goalie. So, and I was always lucky enough that my dad was the coach, like for the goaltending. Like he wasn't always the head coach; he'd be the assistant coach. But he would, it was a very, it was interesting because it's one of those times where it was socially acceptable to get my absolute ass yelled at, and people would be like, "Oh yeah, you know, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that's fine. That's just his dad." Like, and you see that more and more growing up that like certain players have so much potential, but they're never really pushed to really to almost like take risks when they're playing out there. Like it's very it's so weird to see because the parents are actively sometimes a lot more loud than the coaches, and it's because the parents are a lot more invested than the coaches. And I don't want to put it all, I'm not putting it all in coaching by a long shot, but I'm just saying that certain players need to be more receptive to what coaches have to say, and certain players need to be more okay with hearing the coaches rag on them a little bit. I'm not saying completely tear down an entire kid's confidence. I'm just saying, like, for example, if you're going to go into a conversation about it, just say, this is where you're going wrong. I'm not going to sugarcoat this. This is where you're going wrong. This is how you can improve. I hope you can do it. Please show me. And that's it. Like, you don't need to beat around the bush and be like, well, like after, like, just because it's the last game of the year, you don't have to sit around and be like, well, guys, we had a good effort there, but it just wasn't our night. No, if you lost 6-1, there's a reason for that. Like, so be straight up with it.
I wanted to
remember too. You're talking about a kid's confidence.
Mhm.
I agree with that at the minor level, but these are 22 to 24-year-old men.
Right,
They should
but
be able to have a strip taken off.
do you think but do you think those qualities develop from a young age though?
Yes.
As well? Like, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm
and
just
that's
saying.
exactly what it is. You think a rich white kid that's been sheltered and probably been coached by his dad a lot, and just the culture he's grown up in has been used to.
Are you calling me out, Jake?
No, well, I'm just saying, like, I when I grew up, my coaches and
I'm
stuff
2 out
like
of
that,
3.
my coaches and stuff like that would always tell us. I work for my hockey coach now at his company. Like, I'm very good connection with him, and same with all my other ones. And they were always told us that on the bench, we're not your friend. We're trying to help get win this game, and we're doing everything we can. So take it. And then as a player, you want to win, so you're okay getting yelled at because you're like, damn, I'm making the mistake, I'm costing it. You want to play better. And I think that when you shelter a guy and you don't yell at him and you tell him that he's doing good, or you don't give him the pressure on the ice, and I think also, like, swearing around kids and being hard on them and just the language you use around them can be a big impact thing too, because you're a professional hockey player. You got to take some credit. And that kind of makes me talk about this. Compared to what we saw with the Jets talking about leadership, Nathan McKinnon on his exit interview after losing today, going out saying, I'm going into my 9th year and I haven't won shit. That's his comments on the place right now.
That's what he said?
That's what he said in his post game. So that's a guy that has been throughout his career, in his youth, you can tell has had hard coaching, a guy that understands what it takes to win, and putting responsibility in himself to be better and realizing what situations he's in. So I think that we want a guy like McKinnon in the locker room next year compared to what we're getting right now in PLD.
We all want a
Well,
McKinnon in the locker room.
When you talk about it, like, from a coaching perspective here, it's just putting real consequences onto players, and they don't do that because all of a sudden you put a real consequence onto a young player these days and they fold like a cheap tent. And that doesn't mean you have to yell at them. It just has to be, you don't perform, you don't score, you don't do your job, you're going down a line, or you're getting less ice time. Oh, you don't like that? No problem. Now you're getting less. You don't like that again? Then we're going less. And it forces men and kids to be able to build mental fortitude and toughness to get themselves out of the hole, as opposed to deflecting the responsibility onto somebody else.
Exactly.
And that's what breeds winners in the world. And
that's a home argument, though, almost, like how parents raise the children nowadays, because it starts a lot more before the coach is ever getting them on the bench. I'll tell you that much. Getting the attitude of getting out of the hole and climbing out.
Yep, and you know what? You can't talk to people in any kind of forceful way anymore, and that's fine, because you can do it without doing all the swearing and crap. You just have to hold them accountable to it. But even then, the trouble with these young players coming in is if you try to hold them accountable, now they just get to walk away and say, I want to trade, I want this, I want that. Are you kidding?
Well, it's also NBA culture. That's a lot of the NBA kind of bleeding into the NHL's new generation, and like just that modern kind of, and that's been going on in the NBA for a lot longer when it comes to even like just the generation.
There's always that argument of entitlement, isn't there?
Yeah,
like, especially now as the cap raises and more people get $11 million. There's just that thought,
Yeah,
and cap isn't raising though for the next 5 years.
That'll be interesting then.
To kind of bring it back to your last question, Zach, about Cheveldayoff. One, Paul Maurice gets fired before Cheveldayoff loses his job.
100%. 100%.
He gets to try one more coach before he loses. But number two, it's an interesting thought exercise because I'm not sure what the issue is. Did Cheveldayoff not get Paul Maurice what he asked for? Or did Paul Maurice not play what Cheveldayoff wanted to draft? Or number three, the best player available, but no continuity in terms of planning for team strategy.
I think it's the Paul Maurice thing about him. Because like there were times where you saw Chevy like, oh, Ville Heinola should be playing, and Paul's like, okay, I'll give him a game, and then put him in the press box in the taxi again for after that one game. And he did that with Gus, he did that with Harkins, and he did that with a lot of guys. And it doesn't even talk. And it's not even about giving them consistent minutes. It's about having them be fresh. A guy playing one game in 28 days before going into the playoffs, then you have injury problem. He's not coming in. There's a reason why Jordy Ben played over Ville Heinola, and it's not because of size and all that. And you can make the argument, even though it's a likely argument. It's because these guys weren't fresh. That's the only reason why. So I think that's Paul Maurice is just kind of how he runs the ship and how the lines work out. You didn't need to play Forbert and Lewis and Thompson, your vets. You didn't need to play them the last couple games of the season.
They really needed to play others.
Maybe play them
like
in the
more
Stastny
grit.
game if you want vets for the Stastny 1000. If you just
Yeah.
want to have it like that, but you did not need him for some of those other games. And I think that's Paul
It
Maurice's just
injured
coaching strategy.
Stastny.
Exactly. Paul Maurice is just shooting himself in the foot with his old-timey decisions on how he runs
They
his
should
team.
have. They should have done what the honestly, and I say this no word of lie. They should have done what the Bruins did. Literally rest half your main roster for that last game. It doesn't matter if you lose or not, because that team will be playing with the biggest like need to prove something ever. Like if you had, and then they'll be playing with some grit. And guys like Heinola need some grit there. I'm not saying he's lacking it, but he needs to be able to feel how physical he has to be if he gets to a shot to play in the playoffs.
No, you're right.
100%.
You're right. And I think with all of that, that's going to wrap up this episode and kind of our
Pretty
eulogy in a
much.
way to the end of this Jets season. A lot to be looking forward to and a lot of coverage that will be coming your way. We don't know how it will be happening or when these podcasts will be delivered.
Yeah.
We're stopping with the weekly right now because, well, the Jets are eliminated and we can't talk about them weekly anymore. But you bet your butts that we'll be making content as often as we can when we have topics to be talking about. So we appreciate all the listens and all the support you guys have been able to generate on all 3 channels, including the Spotify page. As always, thank you guys so much for watching and listening to us. This really does help out in supporting the channels. Me and Ryan and Zach have all had amazing success individually and together on these podcasts throughout the playoffs, and we all owe that to all of you. So thank you so much. I'm throwing it over Ryan for some ending words.
So I'm going to give it to all you hardcore Jets fans that have nothing better to do now that your team is out and you're not watching the playoffs. I want you to go take a look at 2 Winnipeggers coming up in the NHL draft, both first-round talents. Carson Lambos from Winnipeg, Manitoba. If he doesn't get hurt this year, he actually likely is a top 3, maybe even competes with Power for the number 1 spot. He's in the top 10. Check him out. And go check out Connor Roulette from the Seattle Thunderbirds. This kid is fire. I had him on my team for a year. I had Lambos for a little while. These are really good Winnipeggers. Either one might end up in the Jets. So you got a scoring forward and you have just an offensively gifted defenseman in Lambos. It'll be interesting to see where they go. So go down that rabbit hole for a week if you're bored and you need some good Winnipeg content.
Over to Zach. Closing statements.
Closing statements. Well, so this is like a eulogy for the game and my playoff beard right now. Honestly, like it honestly, like it just feels wrong. I look like Henry Cavill before they edited it properly. Like, oh god. But yeah, no, that's pretty much it. Honestly, like. Be sure, once again, as my colleagues have said, to check us out and check out our individual content because it'll be pretty much holding us over, and you will see a lot of emptiness in our eyes because we'll be wanting to wait to do playoff and Jets topics, but
all in good time, my friend.
All in good time.
Thank you guys so much for listening, watching, and all the support you guys have been able to generate on our content individually and for the podcast. We appreciate you all. To the Jets, this one's for you guys. Thank you so much for watching and listening to everybody. We will see you guys in very, very soon with more content individually, obviously, as well as together on this podcast. Thank you for all the support. I'm Peg City Hockey.
I'm Coach Ryan D from Hawk Garbage Sports.
And I'm Zachary Nolan from the No One Hockey Podcast, and you're watching Disney Channel. No.
Thank you guys so much for listening. Have a great rest of your day, and bye-bye.